I'm Marika, and we're here today to chat with Amy, one of our co-founders of Quattro. And we're working on a project where we get to know a bit more about the team we've got here and their backgrounds and how they came to be a part of this association. So we're going to run through some questions and get to know Amy a little bit better. So we'll get started then, Amy. Would you like to explain where you were born, where you grew up? What did early life look like for you?
Sure. First of all, Marika, welcome to the team for these next few weeks. It's a pleasure to have you working with us and helping us to promote some of our issues. So my background is I grew up in a small town in northern Michigan in the United States. And my town, I have to say, was not and continue, it's better, but was not very diverse, especially when I was a young child. And one of the ways that I was able to, at a very young age, gain an appreciation for diversity was through my mother. She was a teacher, a language teacher. She taught Spanish, French, and English at the local high school. And before she was married, she had lived in Mexico. She had traveled in Colombia, and she always, while my sister and I were young, really promoted literature and learning about cultures that were different from our own. So even though in my town, I didn't necessarily see a lot of diversity, I feel like from a young age, I was always encouraged to be curious and to wonder about others. And I'm so thankful for this, because this has kind of guided my life, essentially.
Yeah, really set you on a good path.
Right.
And so with your tertiary education that you also did in the United States, is that background in your life what inspired you to study language initially and then education?
Yes, definitely. I think I started taking Spanish as a second language when I was about 11. My mother really encouraged me to get involved with these Spanish after school classes. And I just, like she does, I had an affinity for foreign languages. I loved it. And so that's really where my love of the Spanish language started. And then I continued, through high school taking Spanish. I then picked up French in university. I continued with a second major in Spanish and with French and Italian. And so, yes, I would say once again, my mom is really kind of to credit for kind of pushing me in that direction.
Cool. So how many languages do you speak now, and which one has been the most difficult for you to pick up along the way?
I speak Spanish and Portuguese quite fluently. As I said, I started learning Spanish in the 6th grade. And then I lived in Brazil for 5 years, and Brazil and Spanish are so similar that it was not that difficult for me to pick up Portuguese. And in that period of time, I became quite fluent. Today, I feel like I can get around with French and Italian. If I'm traveling to places that speak French or Italian, I can get around in a store or pharmacy. But, to do something professional, for example, in one of those languages, I don't think I could do that at this point, even though I understand quite a bit. And then I have a very rudimentary knowledge of Bulgarian and Hebrew from living in Israel and from living in Bulgaria. And I would say those two definitely were the hardest because of the different alphabets, because they're just outside of that Romance language base. But still also, like when I lived in Bulgaria, I just thought it was fun, learning the Cyrillic alphabet. And I'm not sure if my capacity for Bulgarian was as good as fine-tuned as it is in the Romance languages, but it was definitely fun and interesting to learn.
Yeah, and I think that aspect of having fun with the learning is probably the best way to pick something up. It certainly helps focus what you're doing.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So you've lived in various countries teaching languages and social studies in secondary schools. How do you feel this has helped you develop your intercultural skills and communication, both personally and professionally?
Well, I think both, actually, personally and professionally. Living in so many different places has allowed me to become highly adaptable, very flexible, to really have a desire to nurture intercultural understanding and to have an open-mindedness. I feel like wherever I've lived, I've always tried to go in, curious and wondering. And of course, when you move into a new country and culture, there are always hardships. There are always things that you face. Kind of cultural clashes or where you feel out of your element. But I feel like having moved around so much, it's allowed me to really be able to take things in and deal with them a bit more peacefully instead of, does that make sense? Instead of, getting stressed or having the mindset of, well, in the United States, we do it this way. Do you know what I mean? I feel like I've, over the years, become very adaptable at saying, noticing differences, cultural differences, but being accepting of them.
Yeah, and like you say, decentering kind of what you're used to, and just opening up to the new things that are around you. I mean, that's going to help you a lot when you're in these new situations.
Right. And it has helped too working in international school systems, because the students in the international school system, they're from all over the world too. And so quite often you might have a new student say that comes into your class and they're struggling with the culture that you're currently teaching in and how to help them work through it, and having other students jump in and help, and having just a student body that for the most part is open-minded because they are attending this type of an institution. And so just being in that environment all day where intercultural understanding is nurtured has just been a phenomenal experience.
Yeah. And so how did you get involved with Team Up to Teach? What was the goal of that organization?
So Team Up to Teach, I was in my last year teaching at the Anglo-American school in Sofia, Bulgaria. And about midway through that year, one of the parents of a child that was in the primary section of the school had sent out an email to teachers and asked if there were a group of teachers that might be interested in getting together with her so that she could pick our brains about developing curriculum. And so I volunteered to be a part of this group, and I learned that what she was doing is, she was an engineer by trade, but she had been volunteering in refugee centers in Sofia. And what she saw is that there were many really amazing things in terms of education happening, but that a lot of times things were disorganized, and oftentimes volunteer teachers in the non-formal educational setting were not trained teachers. They were, sometimes young people coming out of university that wanted to do volunteer work. Sometimes they were retired professionals, but not necessarily, they hadn't necessarily been in education. And so her goal was to try to enhance the quality of non-formal education that she saw happening in the centers. And when I learned about what she was doing, I was like, oh, this is phenomenal. And I knew it was my last year in Bulgaria and that I was going to be moving on, and I was going to be taking a break actually from the classroom after 20 years. And so I asked her if she needed help, if I could be involved. And at the time, it was really just, her name was Katie. It was really just Katie and a small group of other people that were trying to put together this NGO. And so she was like, oh my goodness, yes. And so I jumped on board. And then what we began to do is we began to kind of map what was happening in non-formal education, in refugee centers, and in organizations that were helping refugees and asylum seekers across the Balkans. So we traveled to Serbia, we traveled to Greece. We eventually ended up really focusing on the city of Athens because there were so many refugee centers and camps there. And so what we tried to do was to co-create with professional teachers, volunteers that were working in centers, and refugees themselves. And we were trying to pull out curriculum that was being developed in the non-formal context, and then enhance it with curriculum from the professional classroom. That was one of the things that we were trying to do, and trying to kind of pair up professional teachers with volunteer teachers so that they could be a sounding board. What we ended up doing is, in the city of Athens, we mapped over 200 organizations that were helping refugees and asylum seekers. And we created a platform where if you wanted to see what was happening in Athens and who was doing what, who was teaching which classes, who had, for example, other services aside from education, like maybe it was psychological services, or maybe it was teaching people how to training for other skills, like teaching people computer skills or teaching people how to sew. So who was doing what? And we mapped this and we put it on a platform so that people that were in different organizations, if they needed a specific type of resource, they could go to our map and they could see that, oh, you know, over at this organization, they're also teaching French and Arabic. Maybe we can get together with those people. And Katie and I helped them to set up these communities of practice, so that different people, so for example, people that were teaching math in the different camps could meet up together and brainstorm ideas and lessons. And then we also, on our platform, then we would post these various lessons so that they were available to anybody, specifically in the Balkan regions, but really to anybody. The thing that became challenging, as often happens with nonprofit work, is the funding. And so where we initially had a couple of grants that kind of got us through, that helped us to build our website, that helped us to build the platform, that helped us to go into Athens and get boots on the ground and meet with people and create our map, we eventually, the funder did not completely see our vision. And so when it came time to renew our funding, we lost it. And so, and we tried in the meantime to, you know, garner other funding, but at the same time, our personal lives had taken different directions. I had moved to Spain. Katie had moved to Amsterdam with her family. And so we were also no longer in the Balkan region. And so geographically, it became very difficult. And then Katie's career professionally took a different direction. And so we've left our platform up. We still have a Facebook group that every once in a while, especially in the Balkan region, people will jump on and say, oh, can you help me with this type of material? But our vision essentially didn't come to fruition as we would have liked it to. But I feel that what we did was really important. And I hope that there's someone out there that has created something that's maybe similar, where it's brought a little bit more cohesiveness to what is happening in non-formal education. And that's basically what we did. And I feel like we were very proud of what we did, but very sad and bummed that we couldn't ever get like a big funder, like a Save the Children or UNICEF or
yeah.
that would kind of help us along the way. But nonprofit work is like that. It's challenging. And sometimes if you don't have, or you can't find the right connections, your vision kind of falls by the wayside. But I feel like everything is kind of a learning step. And so I feel like what I learned from engaging in that work has kind of followed me into the work that I currently do in Spain now.
Yeah, and that opportunity to bring your professional skills into the NGO environment and create that resources is a really exciting opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah, and following that part of your career, how did you then become a part of the team at Cuatro C, and what is your primary role here?
So I met Ana Selno, who is one of the other founders that you will interview. I met her at a wedding, and we sort of became fast friends, and she pulled me into becoming a member of CIETAR, which is an intercultural organization in Europe and has many countries have their own branch of CIETAR, like we do in Spain. At the time, Ana was president. And so she began kind of pulling me into these different events intercultural events that she was hosting with CIETAR members in Valencia. And we became friends and respected what one another had done. And eventually, Ana really wanted to bring me and Antonio, our other partner in Cuatro C, together, and she wanted to create an organization where we could kind of bring forth investigation, education, training in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the main things that we strive to do is we strive to kind of work between the 4 different sectors of business, academia, government, and civil society. And we constantly are trying to create spaces for collaboration between these 4. And also we're always trying to see, okay, where in these sectors do we see diversity, equity, and inclusion? Where do we not? Right? And how can we help make that better? And especially because Ana and Antonio professionally are intercultural trainers. And so from their end of it, they have many webinars where they host intercultural training or intercultural topics. I help them to promote those webinars. And then also from my end of it, through the other organization that I work through called Asociación Red Aminata, I sort of help to pull in civic society, because a lot of the work that I do with Asociación Red Aminata is connected to helping educate the Valencian community, helping to plug in with the local ayuntamiento, the local kind of government system here, to help us to fight female genital mutilation. And a lot of that work gets kind of promoted and pushed through Cuatro C.
Yeah, no, that's great. Did you want to go into a bit more detail about your work with Red Aminata and more of what they do there?
Sure. So once again, thanks to Ana, I actually met the president of Red Aminata, whose name is Aminata Soko. I met her through Ana, and then was actually really encouraged by Ana to get involved with their association, because it was a new association. They were just starting. They needed a lot of help. And so I did. And essentially what we do is we promote education and training and knowledge around female genital mutilation. And we work with Aminata herself as a survivor of FGM. And we work with women who are mainly refugees and asylum seekers here in the Valencian community that are also survivors of FGM. We give trainings, we help to promote sensibilización, right? So sensitizing kind of the perception of FGM in the community. And then also Aminata herself works as a as a community-based health agent. And when women decide to get the reconstructive surgery that is actually offered here at one of the hospitals in Valencia, then Aminata, in her role as the community health-based agent, she helps accompany these women through the process. And so what I do for the association is I'm a coordinator. So I help to kind of, one of the main things I help do is to secure funding, and then also to kind of help organize the webinars. I'm also the treasurer, so I'm kind of dealing with the financial part of it, and I'm always kind of there to support Aminata in her endeavors. And hopefully we are kind of in line to get a grant funded through another big organization called Pharma Mundi that will hopefully come through this fall and will help to kind of push us in a stronger direction, because the pandemic was very hard for us, and we really, as a small organization, struggled quite a bit. So
yeah, and it's I'll be hoping with you that you get that grant come through. It's such incredible work that you guys are doing there. How have you applied your passions really for justice and diversity to your career, and what are you most proud of to date?
Oh, great question. Well, I would say that early on in my teaching career, being a teacher of social studies, the humanities, and history, and then also sometimes I also taught English, that even before it was framed as such, I feel that I always was trying to work toward decolonizing the history, if that makes sense. Now that term is used quite often, you know, decolonizing your bookshelf or right? And I feel like even though I didn't phrase it as such back in the day, I feel that I always worked the best I could to teach students how to see, investigate, and analyze the viewpoint of marginalized peoples, and to kind of pick apart the colonial histories, not only in the United States, but globally too. Like one of my main units at the International School of Luxembourg, and also again at the Anglo-American School of Bulgaria, was Colonization of Africa, where I very much looked at colonization through the viewpoint of the African's perspective. And I found that students were always so receptive, and students were always, when you sort of push them to see another point of view, one that they, maybe because of their own upbringing, maybe because of things that they were hearing from their parents, that they wouldn't have considered, that quite often it's successful. And so being able to see sort of like minds opening, and this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of streaming in through the curriculum was always such a joy. I feel like in the work that I'm doing now, having done so much work with refugees and asylum seekers, and trying to push through the initiatives that we're doing with the women in Red Aminata, that we're constantly on a mission for justice and for equity. And there's always more to be done. Do you know what I mean? There's always,
yeah, of course,
you know, so much more to be done. But I hope that I've contributed in positive ways and will continue to do so.
Yeah, no, certainly. And building on from that, what goals do you have in mind, both for Red Aminata and for Cuatro Se?
For Red Aminata specifically, one of my personal goals as the coordinator is to try to build a more international presence for us. So I've already gotten us involved with a community of practice group that comes out of Belgium. And what that group does is it pulls together people working toward prevention of FGM from all over the world, and it has created a community of practice for them. And so those dialogues and webinars and messaging usually happen in French and English. And on our Red Aminata team, I'm the one that has the strongest English, obviously, because it's my native language. So I'm the one that quite often is attending those things. If Aminata has time, she is a French speaker, so I try to encourage her to attend too. So that's one of my personal goals for the association is to build our presence internationally. Also to get just more secured funding so that we can really make the work that Aminata herself does with the women relevant. The work that she does as the community-based agent is nonstop. It just doesn't ever stop, because, you know, even if Aminata has accompanied a woman and now she is recovering and is beginning to kind of forge her own path after the surgery, still Aminata is kind of seen as like a beacon of hope in that community, and she's constantly receiving phone calls. She's constantly receiving, you know, questions about how can I do this? How does this happen? Can you help me make an appointment for this doctor? And so to just really get the association in a financial standing where Aminata herself can truly be compensated for the work that she does, because as it stands now, she's doing 3 jobs at the same time and trying to help support her family. In terms of Cuatro Se, I would say just always looking for more ways to collaborate between those 4 sectors that I talked about. And just kind of pushing the envelope always with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and creating more spaces. A lot of times that's, online spaces for the promotion of DEI to happen. And then for both organizations too, is to create more of a social media presence to help get our messages out there. Cuatro Se is really, really active on LinkedIn. Red Aminata, not as much as I would like us to be. And then both associations, we need to build up more of our presence on probably Instagram and Facebook too, to just kind of get our messages out there. Both associations do have websites, so that's good.
Yeah, and part of that, of course, is that the funding aspect of it. The more funding you have and the more time you can then apply to these things, it's going to keep the work ongoing and just building and growing.
Right.
And how do you think people can be inspired to support these issues, these causes, these organizations, and to really get involved in the things that impassion them?
I think that one way. Do you mean specifically for Cuatro Se and Red Aminata, or do you mean just in general, like people?
More in general, really. Obviously for both associations as an example, but just anything really that people are interested in learning more about.
Well, I think that when people follow their passions as much as they can, it's always a good thing. Even if sometimes you follow a path, like with Team Up to Teach, and it doesn't in the end completely become a success, I still think that it's worth it. So I always encourage people, young people especially, that are starting out. A lot of my ex-students I'm still in contact with, who are now young adults getting into the working world, and I always encourage them, follow your passion, even if it seems like a path that is different than what your parents had thought you might do, or different from what the rest of your peers are doing. Follow that passion and see where it takes you. In terms of getting involved, I feel like there's so many things now online that you can do through webinars, that you can sign up for, that you can get involved in. A lot of those things are free. Many of the webinars that we do through Cuatro Se they're free, right? There is no charge for those, and the same with Red Aminata. So as much as you can, I encourage people to kind of find those communities where you might be given access to those kinds of things that you're interested in. For example, like in Spain, getting plugged into the community of Cetar was amazing for me because they're always hosting webinars. And so that comes directly to my email, right? I can see where such and such a webinar is taking place and decide to get engaged with that specific webinar. I think with the way that it is with Zoom now, there's just so many opportunities.
To really take advantage of all the things that are happening on the internet at the moment, especially given the COVID circumstances. So
right. And one thing that I learned from Katie, who was my partner at Team Up to Teach, I have never seen such a dynamo in terms of just like literally getting into somebody's face that she doesn't know and asking questions. I mean, I feel like we were able to create this map in Athens because if Katie didn't know somebody, she would just go up to that person and say, look, I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to create this map. Who can I talk to? Who can you hook me up with? I mean, sometimes, even though I'm a quite forthright person, I would be just standing there with my mouth agape because what? Do you know what I mean? But I feel like that if a person can manage it, it's such a brilliant technique because I feel like we were able to build such a connection with such a network of people purely because Katie would just not be shy to walk up to anybody and ask questions. And if she thought that somebody knew something that she didn't, and she wanted to, try to get that knowledge, she would just very straightforward, and it really opened a lot of doors for us.
And the information more often than not, and the people are out there for you to talk to, and so just having a go is always worth a try. And as you say, you never know where you might end up asking the right questions.
Right, exactly. Keep asking questions until you find the exact one that's going to open the door for you.
Yeah, of course. So just to finish up, is there anything you'd like to add about your experiences or the work that you do?
The only thing that I'd like to add is that this past January, my husband and I engaged in a project together, which he had just started his own studio, and so a podcast studio. And so we started a podcast called Voces Migratorias, Voices of Migration. And we have one season out so far. And basically what we wanted to do, because the both of us have lived all over the world for so long, and we have our own migratory path, our own migratory journey, we wanted to create a bilingual podcast. It's in Spanish and English that focused on individuals who had, in the first season, migrated to Spain for various reasons, right? We interviewed people that, like myself, had migrated for professional reasons. We interviewed others who were forced to flee their country for political reasons or other reasons. And what we really wanted to do was to try to give kind of a broad view of migration that focused on many different types of individuals, because quite often when you read about migration, refugees, asylum seekers in the news, you get a lot of negative publicity, right? You get a lot of the negative aspects of, what's happening when a certain group of people has migrated to another area. And so we wanted to show what it was like for real people and what their lives were like and why they had migrated and ended up living in Spain. And so that was a project that I really enjoyed doing. I loved doing the interviews. And I think lastly, one important thing is we always used to talk about in international schools that I taught, this idea of being a lifelong learner. and we would try to convey that to the students that we taught, right? And I feel that even though I'm no longer in the classroom, that still serves me well, as I feel like I really, really always try to push myself to be learning something new, to be reading something new, to be pushing myself, you know, how else can I, you know, engage in diversity, equity, and inclusion? How else can I learn about anti-racism, for example? So this idea of being a lifelong learner, I feel like is just something that's always kind of in the forefront of my mind, is how can I push myself further? What else do I need to learn? Or what else do I need to unlearn, right? So
yeah, no, and it's an incredible ethos, because it's the best way for you to engage with something on any scale. I mean, if you're looking to learn, then it's whether it's through podcasts or webinars, or even just chatting with people. Yeah, that willingness to learn is going to go a long way.
Right.
Cool. Well, that's all the questions that I have got for you today. Thank you so much for letting us get to know you a bit better.
Yes, thank you so much, Marika. And like I said before, it's such a joy to have you working with us for these few weeks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.